Jalev, Kajagir, Faja, Chauvin, Rove and Sean you. Thank you very much to everybody here tonight for coming. You're all very, very welcome. I'd like to introduce the panel of speakers we have here tonight. This first good looker is Michael Leahy. He's in charge of finance for the Director of Finance for the Irish Freedom Party. You have our fantastic candidate for Wexford, Melissa O'Neill. And the chairwoman of the Irish Freedom Party, Dr. Dolores Cahill, who is a professor at UPD. And myself, a young kid, my name is Herman Kelly, dirty man. So I've got no translator here tonight, so you just have to make do as it goes along. So the first speaker I would like to, who I understand, reading of history, were founded, they had association with a group called the Blue Shirts, early fascists in Irish history in the 30s, and they're showing the true colours, true blue, and they're trying to introduce legislation which would try to cut down freedom of speech. So, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Michael Leahy.
Thank you very much, Chairman. As the name of our party suggests, the Irish Freedom Party, the foundational principle of our party is that of freedom. And this doesn't just relate to the establishment of legislative independence and freedom for our country. It also refers to the core value of freedom of speech. It is because this value is under threat now more than at any time in recent history that when we came to name our party, we chose to name the Irish Freedom Party. There are many crises facing our society, demographic, cultural and economic, but I think they can all possibly be distilled into one overarching crisis, which is the attack against freedom of speech and the attack against freedom of expression. The guarantee of freedom of expression is considered essential to the proper functioning of any democratic society. If opinions cannot be openly expressed without fear of reprisal or recrimination, then it is impossible to develop a proper functioning liberal culture. It is for this reason that Solon, the Athenian lawmaker from the 5th century BC, in determining the future democratic state of Athens, identified freedom of speech as the most important principle. He also incidentally regarded it, or enunciated it as a principle, that it would be considered a crime for any person to shirk involvement in a public controversy. So that's a lesson for all of us when we ponder where our democracy, what our democracy means and where it comes from. You will no doubt have heard of the proposals of the government to, as they say, beef up our legislation relating to hate speech, this strange concept called hate speech. I would think it is extremely important that everybody become involved in the consultation process for that particular proposed piece of legislation. It's online at the moment, and there is an opportunity for people to make their opinions felt. But there is no doubt whatever that the intention of this legislation is to proscribe and to limit the right of ordinary citizens to question significant aspects of government policy, including immigration, climate policy, and the increasingly intrusive regulations relating to sexual and racial politics. You will all be aware of the attacks against freedom of speech, which are now brazenly being advocated at every level of our society, by government, by media, by the civil service, and even recently by the head of the Garda Síochána. These were attacks which would have been unthinkable only a few years ago. In order to defend ourselves against these attacks against freedom of expression, it's important to understand the intellectual and societal currents that underlie the drive to supplant freedom of speech, because you cannot fight an idea unless you know where it comes from. The terms hate speech and hate crime are no doubt expressions that you will have heard on the lips of our Justice Minister, Mr. Charles Flanagan, in recent weeks. These terms are now widely used in government, and on the consultation paper for the consultation proposal of which I spoke, those terms appear on a regular basis as if there is a clear understanding of what they mean, or as if they're not deeply loaded political expressions, which of course they are. They have a clearly sinister Orwellian phraseology, but those terms do not actually appear in George Orwell's 1984. His book refers to newspeak and hate crime, but the concepts of hate, newspeak and thought crime, the concept of hate crime is not actually mentioned in this book. But it is extraordinary to see that clearly those two terms have come from Orwell's 1984, and they're being used without apology now by senior civil servants in our government to persuade us that changes are necessary to our legislation. The concept of hate speech actually derives from the United Nations 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights. That was the first document. That was the first document to introduce the concept of criminalizing speech, which was aimed at promoting hatred. Now, the UN Declaration of Human Rights is a very fine document by and large. But the extraordinary thing was that in 1948, the Soviet Union signed up to it. And that surprised a large number of people. But Joseph Stalin took a very intense interest in that declaration. And it was in his insistence and in the insistence of the Soviet delegation that the concept of hate speech was included in order to give governments the right to delimit freedom of speech where they felt that there was an effort to promote hatred. That's where the whole idea of hate speech being criminalized has come from. Because other than that, in the common law jurisdictions, every country has a prohibition against slander or incitement to violence of hate speech. But they agreed to it in order to get the Soviet Union to sign up. Documents also show that the Western countries, France, Britain, and the United States, never believed that this concept would ever be used within their own countries, that they had sufficiently robust protections for freedom of speech. How wrong they had turned out to be. But the concept of hate speech has now, for the past 30 years or more, been a boon to every social justice warrior, every politically correct bully, and every dishonest government seeking to cover its own tracks. Over the past 3 decades, and accelerating with alarming speed over the past 10 years, the concept of hate has now been radically expanded in the fields of sexual and racial politics, where the point of any expression of dissent can be characterized as hate and can be used to censure an individual. Perhaps the most worrying of all is the extent to which this mentality has invaded popular culture to a level that completely innocent people face career and professional ruin for entirely innocent comments or trivial actions which fall outside an ever-changing and ever-confusing series of cultural norms. In order for people to be able to fight against this new form of tyranny, I believe it's important for us to understand fully the intellectual currents which underlie political correctness. In my opinion, there are two main trends, that of cultural Marxism, and the second is that of the undermining of the meaning of language. Marxist analysis of culture has always presented history as being a struggle between competing power groups, and those who are in positions of power are said to use language and mores as a means of oppressing others, sometimes consciously and sometimes unconsciously. Language is therefore seen as a central element of oppression, and this is why the politically correct industry is obsessed with the minutiae of language and human expression. The second strain relates to the so-called deconstructivist philosophers such as Derrida, Marcuse, and Foucault. These people have, in the words of Jordan Peterson, introduced the most pernicious, poisonous, and destructive ideas into the 20th and 21st century. In his own words, to say that this is appalling is not even to scratch the surface of what they're doing. Their ideas center mainly on the concept that language can never be certain, and that therefore ideas can never be fully understood. This is an attack not just against language, but against thought itself. Many of the tendencies which Orwell so succinctly wrote about 70 years ago were focused on the efforts to debase language and thereby to reduce the population to a state whereby they could not coherently express ideas. This politics, or politics it is, threatens to reduce to great cultural manifestos and the agendas of our main parties. However, the trends of cultural Marxism and the postmodern philosophers have been completely imbibed by our universities, and they have also taken root to a quite extraordinary extent in our so-called centrist parties. Their principal obsession with the main party of government at present seems to be to radically expand the concept of hate speech and hate crime, concepts taken directly from the fascist world of Orwell's 1984. We should be under no illusion what the long-term damage that such a proposal will affect upon our society. If we say farewell to freedom of speech, we also say farewell to any hope of justice and any concept of the rule of law. As Orwell wrote, those opinions which cannot be expressed very quickly become those ideas which cannot even be thought. So our fight is for freedom of thought and the dignity of humanity itself. In many ways, this fight must be undertaken at the same time as we struggle to re-establish an independent, democratic, legislative system for our country, Both of these struggles will go together. Shortly after I first joined this party, I had the good fortune to travel to the United States with Dolores and Herman to attend the CPAC committee in Washington. We should never forget the impact that this country has had on the constitutional architecture of the United States. President Washington cited the Irish and their thirst for liberty as the first people who rallied to the American flag and expressed his gratitude for their principles of liberty, which suffused those of the United States. While I was in the US, I was struck with the warm feelings that many Americans have towards Ireland for this very reason. On our last day there, we visited the Lincoln Memorial, and as I read the famous words of the Gettysburg Address and the Emancipation Proclamation, I remembered that the first speech that that great orator Lincoln had committed to memory was a speech from the dock of Robert Emmet, now largely forgotten in this country. Also that the great role model of the Negro emancipation leader Frederick Douglass was the Irish liberator Daniel O'Connell. Ireland now faces a crisis to its democracy as great and as dreadful as that faced by Lincoln and Douglas. Our own government has quite openly states that its principal duty is to serve the interests of the European Union, which essentially means serving the interests of foreign bankers. But those who recklessly seek to impose non-representative tyranny in this country would do well, in the words of John F. Kennedy, to look to the lessons of Irish history. We are not a people to be trifled with. I do not believe that the Irish people will go gently into that good night. For as in the days of Lincoln, we too are now engaged in a great struggle, and we too must determine whether to allow liberty and democracy to wither in our time. In our case, we must also decide, this generation must decide, whether we will allow our great historic nation to perish from the face of the earth, or whether we have the ability and the courage to forge for our nation a new birth of freedom, a new dawn of democracy, and a new flourishing of nationhood. That challenge will lie with this generation. Many have expressed dismay at the rapid decline of democratic structures in our culture. But we are lucky to be born into a time where we have a noble struggle to face and where we still have the tools with which to fight. Our candidate, Melissa, is nothing if not a fighter. She said that to me earlier. By voting for her, you have an opportunity to strike for freedom, to turn back the winds of repression, and march forth to the street line of freedom. Thank you.
Is this mic broken? Sorry? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as I said, thank you for coming. Herman Kelly is my name. I'm president of the Irish Freedom Party. You can tell by the accent, probably I'm a dairyman. We have a small farm in Donegal and Inishowen, and I've been working over in Brussels in the last 10 years as Director of Communications for a Eurosceptic group and the European Parliament. We came here tonight, Melissa chose to come to Kilmore because it's a rural area with a large fishing base. If we think about it, and the reason we came here is because rural Ireland has been ignored and been shafted by both the Fine Gael government, Fianna Fáil government that we've had over the last number of years, and particularly hurt by the EU austerity. The EU imposed austerity of 64 billion that was imposed on Irish people very unjustly in 2013. So the consequences for ourselves, because of the EU fishing common fisheries policy, the fishermen who go out here in Kilmore Quay, Irish fishermen in general, get 8% of the quota that we have for Irish territorial waters, which stretch 200 miles north, west, south, and not quite 200 miles east. But our territorial waters are huge. They're among the most fertile in the whole of Europe, and Irish fishermen get a measly 8% of that quota. Dr. Karen Devine in DCU did a paper looking at Eurostat figures a number of years ago, where she found that since 1975, that the EU boats have taken 215 billion worth of fish out of Irish waters. This is given that the Irish public debt is virtually the exact same figure. It shows you the loss that we entered into when we went into the European Union, handing over our fishing waters. Once again, Fine Gael have ignored rural Ireland and shafted people living in rural areas. It's Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil cuts which have shut down many of the Garda stations that are essential to the smooth and easy running of and coherence and peace in rural Ireland. It's the EU Postal Directive, which has been very influential, along with the Fine Gael cuts, in shutting down rural post offices, which are frequently a mainstay in rural Ireland. EU, another aspect that has really, how Fine Gael recently have hurt rural Ireland. You see there over the last year particularly, there's been protests in regarding the imposition in rural areas of direct provision centres for those who come and seek asylum in Ireland. We know from official statistics that 90% of those who apply for asylum in Ireland are refused, and would give us reason to believe that most of the applications are false. So over the last year, you've had protests in rural areas like Ruski, in Moville, Uachtarard, Ballinamore, where we had Kinvara there recently, all these rural areas. So where public services are weak in regards to post offices, Garda provision, internet provision, where in these rural areas where public services are very weak, they're the ones, without being consulted, without giving their consent, it's rural Ireland who's been asked to accept the brunt, the attack, the stupidity of these policies from Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil. And I think it's very unfair. Without the consent and with their consultation, rural areas are being forced against their will to take the brunt of Fine Gael stupidity. Another aspect, I spoke there a short time ago about the EU imposed, the 64 billion bank debt imposed by the European Union and ECB and IMF in 2013. That means large cuts to public services for ordinary people in Ireland. And one aspect of that is that we now have the USC, we have an increasing local property tax, we have water charges which are making a comeback very soon, and recently over the last few years, and it's going to be increasing in the years ahead, the government has made it very clear that the carbon tax is going to dip into the pocket of people in rural Ireland, and it's going to hit them. It hits people, the less well off, and rural people more than the cosmopolitan Fine Gael voters in South Dublin. Why is that? Because the less well off have less disposable income by which they can pay this carbon tax. What is the carbon tax? It penalises people for driving a car. So it's going to be more expensive to fill up your car on diesel and on petrol. It penalises people for driving to work. There's a greater charge on heating oil. So the normal punter, unless, I don't think there's many Eskimos living here in Wexford. There's maybe a few more closer up in Donegal, but there's not many in Wexford in the sunny southeast. But everybody has to heat their home in the winter. It's cold outside tonight. I think there's a song about that, something like that. But basically, the carbon tax penalises people for driving to work, for heating their home, and also attacks rural Ireland, and it undermines especially agricultural and farmers. So the carbon tax will also put up gradually, small at the minute, but it's going to increase as time goes on. It's going to hurt farmers. Why? Because it means that your milk is going to be more expensive, that your beef is going to be more expensive, and other aspects like that. Was there anything else? Yeah, and milk as well. I forgot about milk. Milk, beef. What's the other one? Frank, you'll know it. Milk, beef, and lamb and all that there. So meat, milk, all that kind of stuff is going to be more expensive because of these penalising carbon charges which Fine Gael wants to impose upon us with the approval of the European Union, of course.
Just a slight correction.
Yes, Frank.
It's more expensive to produce. That doesn't mean it's going to be more expensive. It's just an extra cost that can't be passed on. This is what's really going to hit your food.
Frank, you're a great prompt, because that was the very point I was going to touch on next.
Sorry.
No, but and I'd like to touch on, as the last point, Melissa will be very thankful for this, as the last point, I'd like to look at the attack on beef farmers in the last number of years. So beef farmers, there's a large dispute at the minute about labelling. It's one aspect. In Ireland, we must be very clear that we know when it's labelled Irish or Irish origin, that we want to know where the beef comes from. Does it come from Ireland? Do we know where it comes from? There's been a lot in the media over the last 2 years about a lot of beef coming in from all over Europe, but it's relabeled, it's reworked a little bit, and it's packaged as Irish beef. So we do have to tighten up the legislation that we need to know when it's labelled Irish beef, that it is Irish beef. Second point is about pricing. That the supermarket chains have been ripping off farmers for decades, and the farmers are not getting a fair share of the profits. If there's the profits, so those who do little of the work, the slaughterhouses and the supermarket chains, after having done little of the work, have taken a huge cut in the profits, and the beef farmers are left with very little. And to top it off, the EU has now signed a deal, this EU-Mercosur deal, which will allow foreign beef from Latin America, Brazil, etc., to flood into the Irish market. Irish beef farmers will find it virtually impossible to deal with that, because they have less of the cost, less of the regulation, less of the health and sanitary conditions that Irish farmers have to live up to. So, ladies and gentlemen, because Fine Gael, the Fianna Fáil government, have attacked rural Ireland, they've denuded us of the post offices, Garda stations, EU membership has undermined the rights of Irish men and women to the benefits of our territorial fishing waters, and has attacked rural Ireland, especially through the carbon tax, and now this attack on beef farmers as well. And it's for that reason, ladies and gentlemen, that I would advocate that you vote for our wonderful candidate for the Irish Freedom Party, Melissa O'Neill. So give her a clap. So, ladies and gentlemen, the next speaker...
Just to introduce Melissa. Go on. No.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Dolores Cahill from UCD. She's chairwoman of our party. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to introduce Melissa in a second, but I just want to say to advertise that we have a freedom of speech rally on the 16th of November at 2 o'clock outside the Dáil, and we're hoping that everyone will be there. And what you see is that the main issues for me is that we need to be very proud and to regain our Western culture, and the issues would be freedom of speech, our democracy, and the rule of law. So why we are actually against the European Union is that they are undermining the rule of law. As you know, the European Courts of Justice and European regulations are superior to Irish law. And how this happened was not in any of the treaties, it was just by a number of court rulings of the European courts over the years. And I think that now as well, in October the 3rd, the European Court of Justice had a ruling that limited free speech online. And the ruling also says that if there's something that in one member state is made illegal, it could be a discussion on any aspect, it could be on carbon dioxide, it could be on migration, on housing, that under this regulation, it can then be illegal in every other member state, and potentially they're saying it could be globally. It also doesn't mean that it's actually hate speech. It just means that then member states can bring in any legislation that they can consider or curtail freedom of speech. And if someone then wins a case in a member state, the European Union, under this regulation, can extend that throughout Europe. So this is really curtailing freedom of speech. And freedom of speech is something that we don't really learn about in school that underpins our society. And it was actually enshrined in the Magna Carta, where in the Magna Carta, the common English people said, no, the law of the land is our law. We have to vote. If we are paying tax, we have to vote for people that implement those taxes, and we have to have freedom of speech. So really the underpinning of our societies in Ireland and England are democracy, rule of law, and freedom of speech. And we can see that these are being undermined by the EU, and therefore regulations are coming in which we can't control, we can't vote for, and we can't change. So we are running this freedom of speech rally on the 16th of November, next Saturday, 2 o'clock at the Dáil, and we would very much like that everyone would come to support us. Because really I would say this is the EU going too far. So if we don't, our generation, take it in our hands, because when we were brought up in the last few decades, we took all this freedom of speech and comedy clubs and everyone actually being robust and having conversation. And there is no right to safe spaces. You know, there's a lot of phony rights to not be offended. There is no right to not be offended. There is no right to have a safe space. There is a right to freedom of speech, and we want to defend it. So I just wanted to advertise the rally, and now I'd just like to introduce Melissa as well. So Melissa is a mom, mother of 2, and she's been elected a councillor in Kilkenny, and she's been on various housing committees and police committees in that role. She's very experienced, and we're delighted to have Melissa to run for the Irish Freedom Party. We hope everyone will vote for her, and I'd like to welcome her to say a few words. Thank you.
Thank you everyone and welcome here tonight. I'm very proud and honoured to have been selected for the Irish Freedom Party, and I just first of all want to thank the team that are behind the Irish Freedom Party. Yourself, Michael, for all your help throughout the week. It's been short notice to run for election, but with a fantastic team behind you, it's made it very easy. So just for Herman and our amazing Dolores, and I want a big thanks for our secretary Susan and our fantastic designer Alex, who, as you can see, has helped me immensely in the last couple of weeks. So just as I said, it's an extreme honour to be selected as a first candidate for a new party for Leinster House. And we have our leaflets here, everyone has one, and we'll be out on the streets throughout the week and the weeks ahead, outside the schools, outside the churches. We are literally going to be just out there morning, noon and night from here on in. So instead of just doing, you know, a scriptured speech, I wanted to go through the actual election leaflet and just to explain and to elaborate a little bit more on some. You can only get so much writing into the leaflet, so I'm hoping that this gets out to the Wexford people and to explain a little bit more. And as Laura said, I am a mother of two children, boy and girl. My daughter is 30 and I have a son of 15. So I'm the normal house mammy, you know, for 30 years now. And as we all know, rearing children in this climate is very, very hard work with everything that's coming down the road. So just to go through the leaflet, basically, as Laura said, I was elected in 2014 to Kilkenny Council. It was an extreme honour for the south of Kilkenny, and again, like that, being a very, very rural area, I would have been out and about quite a bit with, you know, the farmers, and to see the heartache of their families being destroyed daily, to see the mental health of farmers being destroyed. I deal quite a lot with people. I'm advocate for Safe Talk, SOS, and in the rural areas it would be the mental health, the isolation, the financial burden, and this is what I am getting still today, every day, even as, you know, just a candidate. The calls are coming in all around the country from the mental health issues of financial burden of those in rural areas, and it's extremely heart-wrenching, heartbreaking, and it is breaking up families. This is something that we are very passionate about supporting the rural communities. So I love my country, its people, its democratic sovereignty, and its military neutrality. As someone originally from Limerick, I would have been there nearly 20 years ago when the first protest started in Shannon, when we saw those flights coming into Shannon Airport, and everyone said we were imagining things. I think today they can see that we were far from imagining what was happening in Shannon and what military were flying through our country, unknowns to us. And Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have allowed this to happen and continue to lie to the people of Ireland that this was happening and this was coming down the road. So one of my main issues is I strive for a clean, safe environment for all. As a councillor, I have put forward several motions, and proud to say that my fluoride motion passed in Kilkenny Council. There's 15 councils in Ireland that have now passed the banning of fluoride. Now I'd like to remind the Fine Gaelers out there, they went out on a mandate of getting rid of fluoride in 2010. This is 9 years later, and they're pretending they don't even know what the word means 9 years later. So they need reminding of this. 15 councils around the country have now banned this poisonous toxic waste that's in our water, and it's causing severe illnesses that we see in our elderly. And as someone that is a qualified carer and have worked in, you know, visited an amount of nursing homes all around the country, the high amount of dementia and Alzheimer's that is rising in this country is unbelievable. And it has been, and we have a fantastic gentleman in Cork who has actually published papers, and he has linked the fluoride to all sorts of illnesses, including the Alzheimer's and the dementia. So there again, in the environment, another one of my motions that I put forward as a Kilkenny councillor and was on the Roundup. And there is recommendations from the EU for the Roundup to be stopped being sprayed in our public places, in our public parks, near our rivers. And I fought for 5 years on this. Now unfortunately our Irish MEPs allowed for an extra 5 years. So it will be up for review in the EU in 2022. And I really believe that it will be eliminated in public places. But that did not stop our government from starting that now. And this was my argument. Why do we have to wait for the banning in the EU? When the recommendations were there, and Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, backed by Sinn Féin and People Before Profit, are not bringing up the Roundup. This is on our cereal, people. Our children are being poisoned in the water, in our food. So environment is very, very important to me. And our environment then leads back to our health. And I suppose some people might say, why is Melissa O'Neill from Limerick, that was a councillor in Kilkenny, standing in Wexford? I don't believe the amount of people out there would realise that we are now gridded. The government have us gridded into 6 regions. There's no one talking about counties at government level anymore. Everything is decided on a regional basis. I'm not only standing for Wexford tonight, I am standing for the whole region. We share all our services. We share our greenways, we share our bridges, we share our roads, and most importantly, since 2010, Waterford Hospital and Wexford Hospital were amalgamated together. And unfortunately, we can now see what's happening health-wise in the southeast region. I have stood with many colleagues, marched through Dublin, marched through Waterford on the 24/7 cardiac arrest. If you get a heart attack after 5 o'clock in our region, you're put into an ambulance and driven to Cork. That's after 5 o'clock in the evening. So it's just unbelievable the amount of lives we've lost, and I can't stand here, I suppose, and I think of my own first cousin, who was one of those people. Hughie O'Neill was a butcher all his life locally in South Kilkenny, and lost his life at 62 years of age because of that long drive to Cork. This is scandalous what's happening in this region for people health-wise and environmental-wise. Just to move on, and I suppose basically why I'm standing here today and that I have these fantastic people supporting me is that I want to be a watchdog for both Wexford and our region, and not an establishment lapdog. And every single Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael person that's standing in this election and the next are establishment lapdogs. Let's not pretend they are anything more than that. And they are actually under a whip system. So when your local councillors come out, the usual smoke and mirrors, I'm going to get you more guards, they can't get you more guards, it's nothing to do with them. It's all a regional basis. I've sat on a policing committee. The guards are crying out for more guards. If the guards can't get more guards, the superintendents can't get more guards, your local councillors certainly can't get you more guards. We have to remember that it was Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that stopped training the guards in this country for 3 whole years. You have to remember when they looked into the accounts, I think there was something like 23 bank accounts in Templemore where our guards get all the money. Where's the money gone? You know, who's watching these people? So the local Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, I actually was canvassed yesterday by the Fine Gael candidate, and a lovely gentleman he was and very courteous. And he actually canvassed me. I think he realised that he was his opponent. But I read his leaflet and literally said, we'll get you housing, we'll get you guards, we'll get you... Was it not Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael that took this away from us in the first place in our rural areas, especially our guard stations? We've talked about our post offices. I would have put major motions forward for the banking to be brought forward, and I passed that motion actually in Kilkenny as well, for the banking to be brought back to the post offices. Our people are falling down in rural areas. It's not just our banking in the rural areas. We then can go back to our GPs. I've been contacted by Dublin and the Association of GPs, and they've asked me to be their advocate for this region, for the GPs. We have something like 700 GPs that will be standing down and retiring. We have only about 300 GPs that are in college. We're lucky if we hang on to even a third of those GPs in the next 7 years. We are not going to have GPs in our rural areas. We see the state of our hospitals. Just this week alone, we might actually be using our psychiatric ward. There's people sleeping on the floor in psychiatric ward. HICWA have just gone in and more than likely will shut it down. We have bodies decomposing on trolleys in hallways in Waterford Hospital that Wexford share. Wexford and Waterford are sharing the finances, they're sharing the services. Decomposing bodies of our loved ones in the hallways. They have put out this to tender. They have said no one has come back with the right amount of money for the tender, therefore this job is not going ahead. So why are the government not handing down this money to make sure the money is there for the tender? So we more than likely will lose our more services in this area, which is quite frightening. We have no child rheumatologist in Waterford or Wexford. We have no mental health services for our children in Wexford, Waterford, Kilkenny. And again, this is all a regional issue. And that's why I want to stand in Wexford and bring all these regional issues to the forefront. And just to say a little bit more about what we do oppose in the Irish Freedom Party, and I stand very strongly in the membership of PESCO. We were not asked as an Irish nation, did we want to join PESCO? They got on a plane, they went over there, they gave their signature, and they kept it from us. This is not something that we were asked. And basically, I just want to challenge the cosy consensus of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and Sinn Féin, and they are very cosy compared to the people I meet on a daily basis whose families are distraught. So Herman has touched on our fisheries, and it's something very close to my heart. My father is originally from Waterford, and we would have spent all our lives, going down to Fenit Pier during the summer and meeting with the fishermen, and we would get our supper straight from the, down in Kerry, Fenit and Kerry, and Dunmore and different areas. And the highlight of our summer holidays was meeting the fishermen off the boat, and they handing us over that fresh fish. And there was nothing like it, that fish. There was no fish in the world tasted like that fish that the fishermen handed you. So it's very close to my heart. And I've been working and dealing with many of the fisheries in both Waterford and Wexford. And we 100%, as the Irish Freedom Party, want to protect our waters. We now find out there's a new wind farm taking over our waters on the southeast coast, 5 kilometres out. This is devastating news for the fisheries, yet again. It seems they just keep coming in and slapping them more and more and more. And the fisheries, there are generations and generations of the hard work that they have put in, and the families that the fisheries are holding up. And this comes back then to the supermarkets and the small local shops and the small local fish shops. I know you can go down even to Dunmore East, and thankfully there's a small little fish shop there that you can go in and buy your fresh fish. We do not know what we're eating anymore. We can go into Aldi and Lidl and all these places. We don't know where that fish is from. And again, we're back to the labelling. So I just want to move on to the beef, and I set out on the beef protest in Ferrybank. Outside, I can't call him Mr. Goodman, I have to call him Mr. Badman, because it just doesn't fit right to say Mr. Goodman when I see what's going on in his factories locally and all around. Well, I know he's just got the 2 now. And like that again, going back to my own cousin being a butcher for 30 years, and the small butchers, and they are just being destroyed. They are not getting what they should be getting. They are not getting the slice of the pie. So basically, I know the farmers came in, and I didn't want them to come in. I didn't want them to step down. I arranged to go to a meeting in South Kilkenny where Dawn meets and the APP, independent farmers, and the union farmers, I suppose, the Irish Federation group, and there was a split, unfortunately, and that's just life. And they did try and communicate, and I went in and tried to mediate, and basically they were putting the farmers against the other farmers, and it was disgusting what was done by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And to turn around and say, you know what, and I have their list here, I have their demands, and I believe that every one of their demands should have been met and could have been met. And to turn around and tell them, we'll give you a task force. A task force of what? Smoke and mirrors is what a task force is, going out into the EU. I've been out into the EU, I've been to Brussels, I've been to many meetings out there, and basically sending a task force of 3 or 4 people from Ireland representing all the beef farmers. Now, and might I add, there's no one in there in this task force that are representing the independent beef farmers. And that's who I personally, and I know the Irish Freedom Party will back me in this, that we will stand by the Irish independent family farmers of this country. And there was areas, as you just touched off of Borbia, and they have come out again this week, thankfully, and stood outside Borbia. So basically they're importing an amount of meats, which is the major problem. All our meat is being exported. So we're importing beef. They're bringing it and repackaging it and putting it out as Irish meat. It is not Irish meat. And then we have the organic beef farmers. And they are totally being forgotten. Completely and utterly. And I don't know, fair play to them, they are going to come to the Free Speech March. And everyone there will get a taste of the Irish organic beef and they are going to do a barbecue on the day and give out free organic barbecue meat. And you will know the difference between Irish beef and foreign beef, and you know, the grass-fed. And these people have put their lives into making their meat healthy. So when we go in and we see the stamp from Board B on it and everyone's thinking it's Irish, it's not. Therefore, we're not supporting our own. We're not helping them and their families. We're not helping the local butcher. This is the constant domino effect that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have shoved upon us. There's areas, you know, they just want a cap on the price of that animal that they're handing in to Goodman's factories. It's unbelievable how much they have been undercut. So that is a major part of our campaign of Irish Freedom Party. So just moving on, I spoke about the environment. Housing. Housing is a very hot subject at the moment. I've sat for 5 years on a housing policy committee. I was vice chair of that housing policy committee. I was there when they introduced the HAP. Limerick and Kilkenny were the first two countries, or counties, apologies, in the country that were the pilot scheme on the HAP. We argued, we said this would not work. You are giving complete control to landlords. You are taking away the council completely out of it. So people on a RES would have the original housing support that was there, was called RES. So on the RES, and we still have a few, thankfully, because we fought for this, that are on RES, there is a contract with the tenant, the landlord, but there's also a contract with the council and the landlord, and that gave that tenant more security. When the HAP came in, they took the council out of the equation, so it's just the landlord and the tenant. So now we see the fallout, that our lists are going to get higher, and basically this HAP was a make-up scheme, and that's all I can call it. It was a make-up to take people off the housing list, to make our housing list look less. So once you were in HAP, you were removed from a housing list, but your landlord could come and tell you in the morning, a member of my family is moving into that house, or I've decided to do something else, or I'm moving back in myself, and that person's made homeless and is not on a housing list. So it's all playing with numbers. Everything to do with housing is playing with numbers to make them look low. So what numbers you are seeing from the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and fake opposition are fake numbers. And I can guarantee you, when they say there's so many families homeless, they're not telling you how many people are in that family. That could be a family of 7 or 8, but it's just counted as one unit. So when you look deeper into all the numbers, I'm going, I would have fought tooth and nail actually, can I have the number of men, the number of women, and the number of children? And not just one family unit, because that made it look, when they put it out on the 6 o'clock news, that there was less people actually homeless. And another thing that I really need and feel that has to be exposed, they're saying there's 10,500 homeless at the moment. It is one hell of a lot more than that, I can guarantee you. Unless you are basically on the street with a suitcase, that's the only time they consider you homeless. Hundreds of people have contacted me from the 32 counties all over the country. They're sofa surfing. So if you're sofa surfing, they don't consider you homeless. Now as far as I'm concerned, if you're sofa surfing, you're homeless. If I had to move from night to night, to house, that is homeless. That is just the good hearts of the Irish people putting up with people. But that does not mean they are not homeless. And those numbers are not put in the figures. Again, we have touched a little bit on the provision centres. And yes, we are opposed to the provision centres. 100% opposed. This is not the way people should have to live, first and foremost. Again, as we have found out now, I think it's up to 80%, I think were the new figures, of illegal immigrants in these provision centres. Now they get €40 a week. This does not come from government or EU money. This is coming out of our taxpayers' money. So I really need for to understand the difference between what was the refugee, the migration pact that we had and the deal we had with the EU to bring in a certain amount of genuine fleeing war refugees, and they were the Syrians. And I've met with some of these families, and they are absolutely amazing people and beautiful children. And they lived in a tent in Germany for 2 years. These were genuine fleeing refugees. What we are seeing coming now is completely separate. The EU did offer Ireland a certain amount of money to buy what they call turnkey houses. Now, so people are saying, oh, are these Syrian refugees taking our homes? No, they weren't taking these homes because the council didn't have the money to buy those homes to give to people on our housing list. So that money came in separate. It did take from our resources, as in the council had to find the house, the council had to, sort out the family, so our antisocial behaviour officers, all behind the scenes. It did take from our resources of our council workers, and trust me, we have very fantastic council workers working behind the scenes in housing and in all areas of the council. Ordinary people working their job, doing the best they can for the Irish people. And they were taken away in the housing department from our housing list, as in hours of work that they had to put in, rehoming the Syrian families. And the money then was to be paid back. We had to pay it out of our local budget, and every county did, out of their local council budget, and then claim it back. So they did get money back for the housing. So they would not have been able to afford those brand new houses for the Syrian families, outside of the EU money coming back. Now, where we do have a difficulty is, I suppose, I myself live in a council house and very delighted to have it, might I add. I've had 2 mortgages, been there, done that, wore the t-shirt, robbed is all I can say. I think my first mortgage was 14%. I hear people giving out at, the mortgage has gone up to 3%. My first mortgage at 21 years of age was at 14.5% is what we were paying back in the time. So we've been at this a long time, and we've been paying in a long time. So again, the idea that nearly 80% are illegal immigrants, and what has shocked me to my core is that our government have come out openly and said, and yes, we give these people deportation letters. And then someone, I think it was actually at a government committee up in Leinster House during the week, and someone said, well, do they leave them? Who makes sure that they deport themselves? And basically, well, we just hope they'll take themselves off. So we've 80% of illegal immigrants. We don't know even if they've left the country or not. They've got a deportation letter, but they have to take themselves off. They're not taken by the Gardaí to the nearest boat or to the nearest airplane like they would basically in any other country, I believe, where illegal immigrants have been deported. They are actually brought by their government and deported. But no, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are allowing the illegal immigrants to deport themselves, and this has to stop. So just on employment and jobs, again, we support apprenticeships, and it's something that has died out here. We've seen all these schemes come into play, and while I see the excitement of people that when they get 20 euros a week extra on their job, because they said, Melissa, I don't care, I just want to work. Genuine Irish people just want to go out and hold their dignity and work, and they're given 20 euros and they're going, I don't mind. But then it comes to the end of the CE scheme and they're just dropped. Nothing follows up. There's no job to go into. It's just a smoke and mirrors to take down the numbers on our unemployment. I think we're all aware of that. There's the playing with the numbers. They love playing with numbers, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. And just, again, I know Wexford, I've lots of friends in Wexford, and the same as in my own area, antisocial behaviour within our communities. Community development is what I have majored in, and bringing amenities like playgrounds and libraries, which I wrote the proposals for and secured in my own local village, and took 10 years to get a playground in an area of 7,000 people. 10 years. So when we're out paying our taxes, and we're paying our property tax, and we were basically, while sitting on the council, I actually asked the CEO at the time, is it a threat? When we were talking about putting up or down the property tax, there was literally a threat. If you don't put it up, you will not have playgrounds, you will not have libraries. And they used all these things, and I'm kind of going, isn't that what all our taxes are for in the first place? Aren't we paying our property tax? Aren't we paying our road tax? Then we find out 62% of our road tax was just handed over to Irish Water. So you wonder why the pothole outside the door isn't done. Well, there's your answer. So, you know, when the usual, you know, the roads are actually, that money does come in from Europe. And as Herman has said, we are handing out, was it 1 billion, Herman, since 2000?
1 billion year in 2018.
Just in 2018. So we gave over from Ireland 1 billion. And then we sit and wait, like good little kiddies that we are, and see what they'd give us back for funding. It's our money in the first place. So why are we giving them 1 billion to fight back? Now, I have tried and I've worked with groups. I'm very much involved in the community, and I run a lot of community groups from first responders to health and well-being, and setting up the groups. You've tried getting European funded money as a community group, and you'd have to have facet circles from here to Waterford with the hoops you have to jump through to get a penny as a community group. Unless you're a big franchise, which are usually run by or enterprise by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, you have no hope. There is no community funding money coming down to the grassroots of our communities. And I did visit Brussels on community European funding, and flew out there and sat there, and I was like, how do we get our hands on this? So they're taking the money, but try getting it back. It's a completely different story. It's practically impossible for community to get funding money for your local areas. So we need strong action. And again, sorry there, I might have sidetracked to get a bit passionate when it comes to you're stealing our money and not supporting our local communities that we work very hard for. So the antisocial behaviour, and this is something that I would have been very prominent from, maybe even in the news or in the papers, and many people, excuse me, ringing me of the antisocial behaviour. And this is the lack of policing. It is 100% the lack of policing. But it's not only the lack of policing, it's the change in our laws behind the scene. I do not believe the Irish people know what the laws are. So when you run to guard and you say, so-and-so is after doing this to me or saying this to me, and they're kind of going, well, it's not criminal, nothing to do with me, they turn their head, that's civil. So defamation is civil, for instance. So anyone can go out and say anything about anybody publicly, and it has nothing to do with the Gardaí. So this is something that you have to take out of the civil, and this is where we see a lot of fake opposition, I suppose, as we can call them, attacking people like ourselves that are standing up for free speech, that are letting people know the truth of what's happening in Gangster House. And that's what it is. It is a gangster house. There isn't a week or a day that a scandal doesn't come out of there. And it's just unbelievable what's happening. And I don't blame all our Gardaí. We have some fantastic Gardaí out there, and they do want to do their job. But really, it's corrupt from the top down, and we've seen that through the McCabe case and many other cases that are yet to come forward, actually, that I'm aware of. So that antisocial behaviour, it has to come down, and I know Dolores is very passionate about her communities and gave a fantastic speech in Limerick, and it touched my heart, actually. And that we need to get our communities back to being communities. And if we're flooded with migrants of different religions, different cultures, different heritages, I have no problem in embracing anybody into our country that is willing to go out and work the same as we work on a daily basis. and integrate. And this is the word, and this is the most important word for anybody out there that want to throw the word racism at me. We need integration. It is not happening. The integration is not happening. We would love it to happen, and we wouldn't have half the antisocial behaviour that we have today. And I know, from even joining the party, of the amount of people that have come at me in this manner. Now, I was born on this land. I have this right to speak. I have the right to help secure the laws of this land, not the 127,000 regulations of laws we are under by the EU, that the majority of the people, Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael, won't tell you. This is where people feel they're being let down by the Gardaí, by the judges, by the whole court system, the solicitors. I could do a whole story on that one, and the barristers and how corrupt they are, because they know we're under 127,000 regulations of EU. These are laws that were not made by the Irish people. The Irish people, I don't even believe that half the people in Leinster House know what those regulations are, to be honest. I can actually guarantee you I know half the people on the council I was sitting with certainly don't know what they are. And this is something, we want our laws, we want our land, we want our culture, we want our heritage. And we would love for everything to evolve, but evolve in a manner where the Irish people have a say of how it evolves, and not the EU that are basically just talking. So I believe that governments are, our nation and our sovereignty is something that's very close to all our hearts here. And I do believe that we are literally at war for our sovereignty right now. And just to say a little bit more, and this is just my promise to the people of Wexford and all, that I stand by heart and soul, I will continue to strongly campaign on the standards of the cancer care of Ireland. It has been the biggest scandal in my lifetime in this country of what's been done in women's health and men's health, our children's health and mandatory vaccination coming in, the sex ed education, which will destroy the mental health of our children. And I will stand and oppose all of these. I will be a voice for the rights of those with disabilities that have been left behind by a dysfunctional, crippled health system. And I will oppose the new radical sex education bill, protecting our children and especially our parental choice. And as a mother, I promise the people of Wexford that I will do that like every strong Irish mother can. And I know the strong Irish parents of Ireland will stand. And as you've said there of how when you were in America and they spoke about the fighting Irish, they've never come across the Irish fighting Malleys yet.
Hey.
So are there any questions?
Any songs?